Hello, and welcome to this session that's all about developing on the new Slack platform. My name is Jim Ray, and I manage our developer advocacy team here at Slack. And my pronouns are he and him. I'm really excited to show you what the team has been working on, as well as a demo about how to get started. Now, before we get too far, I do want to mention that everything I'm going to be talking about today is still in beta, and any forward-looking statements that I might make are subject to change. So please don't make any purchasing decisions on anything that you hear during this talk. All right, with that out of the way, let's get to it. So Slack is already at the centerpiece of the suite of tools that organizations use to get their jobs done. And with this rapid shift that we've seen over the last few years towards distributed work, having a digital HQ like Slack is more important than ever. And the Slack platform gives you the tools to accelerate work inside your digital HQ to help drive efficiency and realize some cost savings from your communication tool. And just as no two organizations are the same, no digital HQ is completely the same either. And the Slack platform helps you to make your digital HQ completely unique. And so you can integrate the unique mix of software and tools, and you can create some real-time saving automations in the same place where your workers are going to get their work done and to communicate with each other. And so we've got over 2,500 out-of-the-box integrations, as well as a suite of robust tools that allow you to build custom workflows with code or without. And so anyone can create automation inside of their digital HQ and start to accomplish more with the tools that you already have. So in fact, a recent survey of Slack's customers globally saw that a 29% increase in time savings from these automations and 30% higher engagement with the integrated apps since integrating them into Slack. And so that means that Slack is enabling individuals to do their best work more effectively, but it's also increasing the value of the existing tools that you have. So we know that these off-the-shelf integrations are a fantastic way to get started with the platform. And we also know that custom development is how organizations go even deeper. And so today, there are 1 million developers that are using the Slack platform to build custom mission-critical integrations that help their organizations do amazing work. And so the ability to combine events from multiple disparate streams and sources of record is what makes Slack the engagement layer for your most important work. And this is especially true when it comes to everyday tasks that require things like collaboration or feedback or some kind of approval process. And so with the unprecedented change that we've seen with the way that people work over the past few years, we've been hearing from customers as well as analysts that there's a more urgent focus for businesses to figure out how to increase their adaptability and resilience, and really to kind of future-proof their IT stack. And so Gartner calls this the composable enterprise. And really what this means is moving from these kinds of one-size-fits-all, completely robust, prepackaged, monolithic solutions into something that is much more modular. And really, it's all about creating building blocks to allow for custom solutions that can be easily updated as the needs of your organization change. And in addition to this mindset shift towards these more composable software, the technology that powers these innovations is also changing. So instead of managing the typical compute stack that you might think of when it comes to web applications, we've seen the rise of what's called serverless computing. And this allows developers to focus on building individual singular functions. And so today you can write one of these functions or a whole suite of these functions, and they can accomplish individual tasks. And you don't have to worry about things like provisioning and load balancing and managing all the infrastructure for that. You can just write that function, deploy it out, and it accomplishes this single task. So we want to bring all of these exciting developments together and make this the way that people develop Slack apps going forward. And so right now, when you go to build a Slack app, it requires you to create one of these kind of monolithic apps. You have to manage the app, and it's sort of a one-size-fits-all approach. It takes a little bit too long to get started. And the apps that you create, they end up being really robust, but they're not always as flexible as organizations need. And what we've heard is that organizations want these apps and integrations that they bring into Slack to be really adaptive. And so with the next generation platform that we're introducing today, we've got a new way to build and increase the modularity of your apps and make them much more composable. So you'll be able to build smaller, reusable components that can be composed inside of a workflow, and then you can update those individual components over time. So the first part of this kind of paradigmatic shift that we've got going on here are what we call functions. And functions are really the heart of this new platform. And so these are reusable bits of functionality that anyone can write. And they are the foundation of this new platform. And so it's all about developing modules of functionality that can be grouped together inside of custom workflows. And because these functions work independently of each other, they can be reused across multiple solutions even, and then you can update them much more easily and even incrementally without having to go through and update a completely new app or way of working. And so when you've got these functions, they can then be grouped together as workflows. And so you can take the functions that you write, you can take functions that Slack provides, or you can pull from a library of functions from third-party apps and pull those together inside of Slack to create one of these workflows. And so today you'll be able to compose these workflows as code. And then coming soon, we're going to be introducing a new version of Workflow Builder that will let anyone in your organization create these custom automations without having to write any code at all. And then the final building block is what we call a trigger. And so this determines how workflows are actually executed. So triggers can be user initiated, they can be scheduled to happen at a specific time of day or day of week, or they can respond to events that are actually happening outside of Slack. And so you can have messages post into Slack that include invisible message metadata, or you could even use something like webhooks to call these triggers from the systems that are working outside of Slack. And then that trigger can execute a workflow that then calls the functions that we have. So this is how it all comes together. So first, functions are part of this ecosystem of reusable components. And Slack is building a lot of built-in functions. We're working with our third-party partners. And then within your organization, you can also write these functions using the exact same APIs that we use and that our partners use. So we're going to be adding these functions, and they're going to increase the possibilities of the things that you can do in a workflow. So if you're building workflows today, you might be familiar with what you can do now. But in the future, you'll be able to do things like create a new channel or invite the user to a channel. And then we're also working with our third-party partners, and they're going to build functions right into their apps. So then you'll be able to install an app, and that app will bring functions along with it. And then you can use those functions inside of your workflows much more easily, and you can much more quickly get started without having to worry about things like auth. And then finally, we want to empower developers to write their own functions as well. So you'll be using the exact same APIs that we're using and that our partners are using to build out these reusable components for your own needs and for the needs of your organization. And so all of these functions are going to be available in kind of this ecosystem. And so once you've got the functions that you need, whether you're writing them yourself or bringing them in from a third party, you'll group them together inside of a workflow. And right now you'll write that workflow as code, and then the functions will essentially act as steps. And with the next version of Workflow Builder that we're going to be introducing in the near future, these functions will actually show up as steps inside of Workflow Builder, so that the non-technical users in your organization can easily mix and match these together. And then you'll also be able to pull them together as your corporate developers to save time in the development process. And so using this ecosystem of components, you're going to have much more possibilities about what you can actually automate inside of Slack. And then once you've created a workflow, you'll be able to publish it as a template for other people to use. So right now, if you wanted to share a workflow across your organization, you have to export it and then maybe put it into a channel, and they have to download it, and then they can update it. So what we are building now is that you'll be able to actually publish these workflows for other people to use, and then they can adjust them as they need to. So they may need to remove a step or add an additional step or just kind of change some of the parameters. So they'll be able to pull those from the solution gallery as well. So in addition to what we're calling these new building blocks, we've really focused on the developer experience to make getting started and continuing to build Slack apps easier and better than ever. And so we want the process of building a new Slack app to be predictable, fast, and easy for everyone. So we are introducing a new CLI. You can actually download it today. And this will allow you to quickly and easily create new apps right from the command line. You'll be able to develop anything locally on your machine. So previously you had to use third-party tools, or you had to go through this system where you uploaded your application every time you were testing it. Now we want developers to be able to test locally. We've built a new SDK using TypeScript so that you can do things like catch errors faster, or get some, if you've got TypeScript tools built into your development chain, you get everything that comes along with that for free. And you'll be able to do things like run automated tests using manifests. And really, it's all about creating the complete software development life cycle for your applications. And so with these end-to-end improvements in developer experience and developer ergonomics, we feel like you'll be able to ship your quality code much faster and bypass all of the kind of tedious parts that go into building a Slack application today. And then the final part of developing a Slack app is clearing this big hurdle that oftentimes shows up right at the finish line, which is figuring out where you're going to host your app. So a Slack app on the back end works just like any other kind of web application. And oftentimes this means that the developer, once they've built their app and tested it and everything, they then have to figure out where they're going to deploy this so that it can be up and ready for the kind of mission critical applications that we know our developers are building. So with the new platform, we're actually for the very first time offering infrastructure that is managed and hosted by Slack that you can use. You can deploy these functions and workflows to, and we'll manage that for you. So you don't have to worry about the hosting piece at all. So we're streamlining this end-to-end development experience and using this infrastructure that we have. And the best part is it includes everything that you've already come to expect from Slack, the place where you're storing your data already. So it's going to be secure and compliant by design. So if you care about things like SOC 2 or FedRAMP or HIPAA or FINRA, all of that is built into the infrastructure. You can also do things like limit external network calls. So this is great for administrators. So because the code is going to be hosted on Slack's infrastructure, then you'll be able to say things like, I don't want this application to call out to third-party APIs except for the ones that I want to explicitly allow. So we think this is going to be great for administrators as well as great for developers as well. And I should note here that the ability to deploy on Slack's infrastructure, that's completely optional. So you'll be able to take advantage of things like functions and workflows on your own infrastructure. If you've got apps that are built on Bolt right now, we've got an upgrade path so that you can easily integrate things like functions into your apps. But if you want to host, if you want to deploy on Slack, then you can do that. And if you would rather continue with how it is that you're hosting it, then by all means, continue to do that as well. And so to sum it up, the developer platform has been reimagined. So it's really this new modular architecture that is going to allow you to quickly and easily get started, build apps that are much more flexible, and really they have this foundation of reusability so that the apps you build, they don't have to be these kind of singular monoliths anymore. They can be something that members of your team can remix. So we've got these three fundamental building blocks. We've got functions, workflows, and triggers. And these are going to enable you to build workspace enhancements and automations that are going to bring external data as well as just make it easier to get your work done. And we've got a massive amount of improvements to the developer experience itself. And so this is going to make it easier and faster to conceive of, develop, and deploy these custom applications. So all of these features are available right now. We are in a public beta, and so you can start building these next generation apps today. So the QR code is here. We'll also include a link down in the description. And so this will take you to our developer portal that my colleagues have been hard at work building. And so you can enable your organization to use the open beta. You can get the docs that you need to get started. And we've also got tutorials and sample applications that you can learn from as well. And so this is a great way to get started with all of the new features that we have here. And so now let's see how all this fits together with a walkthrough of building an application. Okay, so now that we know all about the features of the new Slack platform, let's take a look at how you actually build a project using the new tools with these new features, as well as the developer tools that we have available. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just create a new project, and I'm going to create this new project using one of the templates that we have available. As I mentioned, we've been building a whole bunch of tutorials as well as sample code here. And so I'm going to use some of that sample code just to kind of show off how all of this works. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to type Slack. The name of the CLI is Slack. And I'm going to create a new app. And I'm going to optionally give it a name here. So the app that we're building is an app that requests time off. So I'm just going to call it my time off app. And I'm going to use a template for this, and I'm just going to download it from GitHub. So from our Slack samples directory, and I'm going to do deno request time off. And so now it's going to actually download this template, and it's going to create a new application right here. So see that if I cd into the my time off app, then right here, we have a whole bunch of code that has been automatically generated for us from that template. And so we'll walk through exactly how this works here in just a second. I'll show you how the functions and the workflows all work together. But I just want to showcase how the application itself actually works. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to create that trigger. Now, remember, the trigger is actually how you call your workflow. So I'm going to do Slack trigger. We're going to create a new trigger. And this app already has a trigger defined. So I'm just going to call it from the triggers directory, and it's in that TypeScript file there. And so now what it's doing is it's actually creating a trigger for the application, and it's asking me which workspace that I want to use. So I've got a sandbox one here, so I'll just put it in there. And so now it's going to create a user-initiated trigger. And what it's going to do is it's going to give me a URL here, and then I can use that URL and actually create I can actually have the trigger appear in a line in Slack. And so then the final thing I need to do is actually just deploy my application up to Slack's managed infrastructure. And so I'll just do a Slack deploy, just like this. And what this is going to do is actually package our application and send it up to to Slack's infrastructure, and then the application will actually run on Slack itself instead of having to run any place that I would need to do. So it's deploying up to Slack Cloud right now. All right, so now I can head on over to my workspace and I can see this live. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this URL that was generated by our trigger here. So I'll just copy that, and then I will head over to my Slack workspace. And so here I've just got my sandbox workspace, and I'm just going to paste that link right in here. And so this is what happens when you generate one of these link triggers, is that we have this box here that will allow you to just run our workflow from right here. So I'm going to run this. It's telling me that I've started a workflow, and now it's asking me for the details of my time off request. So I'm going to pick a manager, and in this case, I'm just going to pick myself. Sure would be nice if I could just approve my own PTO. And I'm going to pick some time for maybe after Dreamforce, and we'll say post Dreamforce R and R. And I'll go ahead and submit that there. And then if I look over here in my sidebar, look, I've got a new notification from something called the My Time Off app. And now I have a new time off request has been submitted. It came from me. The dates for the time off are the September 26th through the 30th. And the reason are post Dreamforce R&R. And I feel like I've worked really hard on this, so I'm going to go ahead and approve that time off. And so now the time off request has been approved. So that's a really simple workflow. You could imagine how this might integrate into an HRIS system, for instance. You might be able to do things like look up the person's manager automatically so that you could DM them and then respond back. And then you would even save that information into the database there. And so now I'm going to come back over here to my CLI, and let's walk through how this code actually works. So I'm just going to open this up in a code editor, and And then we'll just kind of quickly look at how all of this works together. Okay, so here is the application itself. And probably the first place that you're going to want to start is the manifest file. And you'll notice that it's written in TypeScript. TypeScript is the programming language that we are using for the SDK that you use to deploy to Slack. So the infrastructure that you deploy your application to is built on a JavaScript runtime called Dino. We love Dino. It's great. It's secure and very performant right out of the box. And it supports TypeScript right out of the box as well. And so we built an entire SDK with TypeScript to hopefully make it a lot easier to build these kinds of applications. So you can see here in our manifest file, we are importing, first of all, we're importing a standard library. That's what this first line does. And then you can see here that we're importing a workflow as well as a function that we built to manage this. And you can, the demo that we just ran kind of showcased how all of that worked. And so you can see here that the name is My Time Off App. Now, if I wanted to change that, so, let's change this to, PTO requester, let's say. If I save that, now as soon as I deploy, then the name of my application will change, and we'll see what that looks like here in just a second. And then I can also, I define my workflows and my functions here. You can see here at line 11, the outgoing domains. So this is where, if you are calling out to a third-party API, for instance, this is where you would list what those third-party APIs that you're going to be calling out to are. And then when you go to install the application, any administrator will have visibility into those outgoing domains. So we think that this is going to make applications much more secure by default. So that's the manifest file. It's mostly all about kind of managing the metadata of your application. Now, the next thing is you're likely going to want to write a function. And so the function is probably the first thing that you're going to want to do. And so our function has a few different components to it. It's mostly just basically, instead of having like one big TypeScript file, we broke this function down into a few different files. But so let's take a look at the definition TypeScript file. And so again, you can see that the first thing that we're doing is we're importing the standard library that we have. And then you can see here that we've created this send time off to manager function. Bit of a mouthful, but it does exactly what it says, which is sends the request to the manager. And so the function itself, this part is just the definition of the function. So it's a little bit verbose, but it's all pretty much just JSON. And you can see that it's got a callback ID, it's got a title, a description. And so all of these things are important, and you'll want to make sure to fill those out because they'll show up in various places in the Slack UI. And then you define the input parameters. And so, a function that requests time off is going to want to know things like who the employee is, who that person's manager is, what the start date of the PTO is, what the end date, and the reason that they might be requesting PTO. So those are the inputs for your function. You can also optionally require specific inputs. So if there are some things that you want to keep optional, but some things that you want to require. So in this case, we're requiring the employee, the manager, the start date, the end date, but we are not requiring the reason. And so you can optionally include the reason with your request. And we don't have any output parameters here. And that's because this is just going to take all of that information and then create that request. And so this is just the definition of our function here. And then if we head over to this mod.ts file, then you'll see here that this is where we actually manage the kind of logic of our function. And what we're doing here is we're just building out a BlockKit interface, and we're using that to then compose the interface for the request that gets sent to the manager. So in this case, we've got some buttons. So we want an approve button and we want a deny button. And then we're actually going to just send the message to the manager. And we're using the post message command here. And so then we're just going to bundle all of this up and we're going to send that to the manager. So you can see here that we've got our UI that we've composed up here. And then we're including the text. So somebody is requesting time off. And we've got some error handling in here. And then we've got the BlockKit actions. So in our case, you remember that we had an approve button and a deny button. And so the handler here is going to manage what happens when we click one of those buttons. And so then we can come over here to the block actions TypeScript file, and this will just handle what happens when the user, when the manager clicks either the approve or deny button. And so, your request was approved or your request was denied. And so, and then, we're updating the message itself so that the manager doesn't double click. So we've got a little bit of logic here, but really it's all about just kind of posting that message to the manager and then managing what happens when they click the button. So you can imagine, if they click the approve button, then you might call an API that updates that in an HRIS system, for instance. And so you can use this template for the specific actions that you might have as well. And then finally, so that's the kind of functionality of our function. And then finally, we bring all of this together inside of a workflow. And workflows right now are limited. You can write your workflows in code. With the next version of Workflow Builder that we're going to be introducing early next year, you'll actually be able to compose workflows using these functions inside of the visual Workflow Builder interface that is built into Slack itself. So you can see right here, we're defining our workflow. And again, a workflow has a callback ID, a title, a description. It's also got input parameters. And so, the workflow itself is, in this case, it's just saying that our workflow is going to be interactive, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to call a form, and the form is going to define those input parameters for us. And so we are going to, so we've defined our workflow up here. And then once you've defined the metadata of a workflow, then you just add steps, and you add the steps in the order that makes sense for the workflow. So our first step is that we're going to call the built-in open form function. So that's this line right here. We're going to call open form, and then we're going to pass it all of the details that this form needs. And so a form has a title and it has a description, and then it's also got all of the fields that, that you would want to have in your form. So again, we've got a manager, a start date, an end date, and a reason. And those map to the inputs of our function that we defined. And so we're going to call this form. The user will be able to fill in the form data, and then that form data will get passed on to the function. Now you'll see here that each form element has, in addition to a name and a title, it's also got a type. And so this is where the power of using TypeScript has really helped us out, because what we've done is we've defined our own types. And so in this case, we've got a type of user ID. So you'll remember when we called our function, then I had that drop box that automatically listed out all of the users in that workspace. So this comes for free. So if we just say that this input is going to be of type user ID, then we'll automatically compose that form element for you so that you don't have to worry about doing that, you as the developer. So the next is the start date. And again, this is going to be of a type date. And so again, that's where we compose that date picker. And the end date is also going to be a date picker. And the reason, now this is going to be, you'll see here that the start date and the end date and the manager, these are all types that were defined by Slack. The reason is just, that's a standard string. And so we're saying the reason that the person is going to be requesting the time off, let's just make that a string. And so that's just a standard string. So we'll take all of those inputs and we'll pass it on. And our documentation lists all of the various types that you might be able to use and how those will actually show up in your workflows. So step one in our workflow is that we are going to open up this form data. And step two is that we are going to, we're going to call that send time off requests to manager function. And so that was the function that we defined earlier. And so that's the second, and in this case, the final step of our workflow. And so, so all of the inputs that function defines are right in here. So we've got the employee and the manager and the start date and the end date and the reason. All of that is coming from the form data. The employee, we know, is the person who kicked off the request. And so So in this case, we're taking that from the interactor ID, which is just the person who kicked off the workflow. And then, but the manager, the start date, the end date, and the reason for requesting the PTO, those are all coming from the form data. And so we're taking all of that, and then we are sending it on to the user. So that's basically how an app works. Now, we made a couple of changes to the metadata here. So I'm just going to do a Slack deploy again. And once again, it's asking me, because I am logged into multiple workspaces here, it's asking me which of the workspaces I want to deploy to. I'm going to deploy to the sandbox that we deployed to earlier. And we'll come, so it's installed and everything is packaging up. And then we'll head back on over after it finishes deploying. We'll head back on over to our workspace and we'll see that change that we made should be reflected live. And so now you can see it went from my time off to PTO requester. And so we made that change and that was happening live. So that is all about how to use the new Slack platform. Again, head on over to api.slack.com and you'll see everything that you need to get started. And thanks so much.